He said it on a Sunday afternoon in October of 2009. We were sitting on the porch of his house, not mine. He had built something of his own by then, and I was sitting in it as a guest the way fathers eventually become guests in the lives of children they raised. It was a good afternoon, one of the better ones we had in that period. The kind of afternoon where the conversation moves easily and the silences are comfortable, and you drive home afterward feeling like something has been maintained that you were not always certain could be maintained. We were talking about his work, about a project he was managing that was going well. He was telling me about a decision he had made that had produced a good outcome, and he was telling it the way men tell stories about their own competence, with a specific and careful modesty that is its own form of pride. And I listened, and then I said something. I do not remember exactly what I said. Something affirming, something that acknowledged the good decision and placed it in the context of what I knew about his capabilities and his history and the particular way he approached problems. Something that was, in the specific terms of that moment, entirely appropriate and supportive and well-intentioned. And David looked at me for a moment, and then he said 6 words. 6 words that I have turned over in my mind on more mornings than I can count in the 15 years since that Sunday afternoon on his porch. He said, "That is very generous of you." 6 words. That is very generous of you. I heard them as a compliment at the time. I was in the car driving home before I understood what they actually were. My name is Harold Voss. I am 84 years old. My heart is running at 38%, and I have spent 15 years understanding 6 words my son said to me on a Sunday afternoon in October of 2009. Today I want to tell you what they meant. Not what I heard at the time, what they actually meant. Before I go any further, I need to ask you something. Has someone who loves you ever said something to you that you heard one way in the moment and understood completely differently later? Not an argument, not a confrontation, just a sentence, 6 words or 7 or 3, something that seemed ordinary when it arrived, and that you were in the car before you fully heard. Write yes or no in the comments, just yes or no, because the sentences we hear wrong in the moment are almost always the most important ones, and the gap between when they were said and when we understood them is almost always exactly as long as it needed to be for us to have done something different with them. Let me tell you what that is very generous of you actually meant. David was 37 years old in 2009. He had been building his professional life for 15 years at that point. He had made decisions, good ones and bad ones. He had taken risks that worked out and risks that had not. He had developed a specific and genuine competence that was his own, and that had been built through his own effort and his own judgment, and his own particular way of approaching the world. And in the years leading up to that Sunday afternoon, he had learned something about what it felt like to share his work with me. He had learned that sharing his work with me produced a specific kind of response: affirming, supportive, intelligent, contextualizing. His work placed inside my framework, his decision assessed against my experience, his competence acknowledged through the lens of what I knew about competence. Not his competence on its own terms. His competence as I understood it, measured by my standards, affirmed by my judgment. That is very generous of you. He was not thanking me for a compliment. He was telling me something about what my compliments had always cost him. That receiving them required accepting that his father's assessment of his work was the relevant assessment. That being affirmed by me meant being measured by me. That the generosity he was thanking me for was the generosity of a man who has the power to assess and has chosen to assess favorably. Not the generosity of a man who simply sees his son. I drove home. I sat in the driveway. I thought about that sentence for 45 minutes before I went inside. Here is the first specific thing I want to tell you about those 6 words. They were the kindest correction I have ever received. David did not say, "Dad, when you affirm my work, it makes me feel like you are grading me rather than seeing me." He did not say, "Dad, I have spent 37 years having my competence measured against your framework and I am tired of it." He did not say any of the things that were true and that would have required a conversation I am not sure either of us was ready to have on that Sunday afternoon on his porch. He said 6 words that were true and kind, and that left the door open for me to walk through if I was paying enough attention to understand what they were pointing at. That is very generous of you. He was giving me the chance to hear something important without making it a confrontation. That is what people who love you do when they have given up on confrontation but have not yet given up on you. They say the things sideways, and they wait to see if you hear it. I did not hear it for 45 minutes. I heard it in the driveway, and then I went inside and I did not say anything to Margaret about what I had understood. And the next time David told me about his work, I did the same thing I had always done. I affirmed it. I contextualized it. I placed it inside my framework and assessed it generously. And he said thank you. And something that had been slightly open on that Sunday afternoon closed again. Here is the second specific thing I want to tell you. The sentences people say sideways are the most expensive ones to miss. When someone confronts you directly, the cost of not hearing is immediate and visible. The conversation escalates, something breaks or bends or gets repaired. There is a before and an after that you can point to. When someone says the thing sideways, the cost of not hearing is invisible in the moment. The door they opened closes quietly. The thing they were trying to tell you goes back to wherever they keep the things they have stopped trying to tell you. And you drive home feeling like the afternoon was one of the better ones. You do not know that anything has changed. You do not know until much later when you are trying to remember the last time David told you about something that was not going well, and you realize you cannot remember. Not because David stopped having things that were not going well, because David stopped telling you about them, because the experience of telling you about them had a specific cost that the experience of not telling you did not have. And 6 words on a Sunday afternoon in 2009 were the last time he tried a different approach before settling permanently into the approach that cost him less. I missed it. For 45 minutes I was in the driveway trying to hear it, and then I went inside and I missed it for another decade. Here is the third specific thing. The framework was the problem. I have thought about this a great deal and I want to be as precise as I can about what I mean. I am not saying that having standards is wrong. I am not saying that competence and judgment and the ability to assess a situation accurately are negative qualities in a father. I am saying that when your children experience your love primarily through the lens of your assessment, the love and the assessment become inseparable in their experience of you. And then being loved by you feels like being evaluated by you. And being evaluated by you requires performing for you. And performing for you is exhausting in a specific way that being with you should not be exhausting. David was not performing on that Sunday afternoon. He was telling me about something that had gone well, naturally. The way you tell someone something when you are not performing for them. And I responded in a way that reminded him that he was, in fact, performing for me, whether I intended it or not. That is very generous of you. He saw it clearly. I saw it 45 minutes later in the driveway. And then I went inside and kept being the same father I had always been for another decade. Here is my second question for today. What is the framework through which the people who love you most experience your love? Not how you experience giving it, how they experience receiving it, because those two things are not always the same. And the gap between them is where the most important sentences get said sideways. Write one word in the comments. Just one word that describes how you think the people closest to you experience your love. I will tell you what the honest word would have been for me for most of my adult life. Conditional. Not because I did not love them fully, because they could only access the full version of it by meeting a standard they had not set. That is very generous of you. He forgave me for it. He did not say so directly. He said so sideways. The way David says everything that matters. On a Tuesday evening in 2019, he called me. Not Christmas, not his birthday, just a Tuesday, he said. I wanted to tell you something, Dad. I had a difficult quarter. The business went sideways in a way I did not anticipate, and I made some decisions I am not proud of. And I wanted to tell you about it. Not to ask for my assessment, not for my framework, just to tell me. I sat with that for a moment. And then I said, tell me what happened. Not what did you do wrong. Not, here is what I would have done. Just, tell me what happened. He talked for 40 minutes. I listened. At the end, he said, thanks, Dad. I needed to say it out loud. I said, I am glad you called. He said, me too. That was it. No assessment, no framework, no generous affirmation that reminded him he was being graded. Just a Tuesday evening phone call between a father and a son, where the son told the father something difficult, and the father listened, and nothing was evaluated, and something that had been closed for 10 years opened again. Just a little, but open. That is the 2 years I keep coming back to. Not the 30 of getting it wrong. The 2 of finally getting it right. And the Tuesday phone calls. And David's voice when he called not on Christmas and not on his birthday, but just on a Tuesday because he had something he wanted to say out loud. That is what it cost to put the framework down. A decade of Tuesday phone calls that did not happen, and the one that did. Leave me a comment. Write yes or no. And if you want to write the sentence someone said to you sideways that you understood too late, write it. I read every single one. And if someone you know has a child who has stopped bringing him the difficult things, send this to him. He needs to hear it. While I still can.